but really, truly, the most eloquent and powerful voices and faces are behind me here. Most prominently, Kristen and Michael Song, who are going to follow me. I want to begin by thanking the town of Guilford for having us today. I think that Mayor Huey will speak at the end, but I also want to thank my partner and colleague in this effort, Senator Murphy, who could not be here today. As you know, he and I have helped to lead the effort in the United States Congress, and on the horizon, for the first time, there's real hope that we can accomplish significant steps against gun violence, because the House is now Democratic, and because the activists behind me put gun violence on the ballot last November, and gun violence prevention won last November because of the activists whose voices and faces have made such a difference in this battle. And I want to thank also members of the Connecticut State Legislature, led by Sean Scanlon, who is here today, and their leadership in putting Connecticut at the forefront of the effort against gun violence nationally has been so inspiring and important. Tomorrow would have been Ethan Song's 16th birthday. Almost a year ago, he was killed by a firearm, a .357 Magnum, stored in the closet of a friend's home. That firearm was accessible to both him and his friend, and he was killed tragically, needlessly, senselessly. But the Song family has chosen to inspire us with their courage and strength to help save others. Today, 4.6 million children live in homes where there are firearms, most of them unsecured. More than a third of them, according to the polls report, they play with those firearms, just as Ethan and his friend were doing when Ethan was killed. In school shootings around the country and other mass murders, 65% of the guns reportedly were taken from homes of that person or a relative and used in those acts of mass murder. The failure to safely store firearms is a major preventable cause of death and injury as a result of gun violence in this country, and we must act to stop it. Now, for most firearms owners, safe storage is a matter of common sense and simple safety. And many firearms owners reliably and securely store their guns. But many do not, and they should be held accountable. That's the purpose of this federal law. Hold accountable any firearms owner who fails to safely store or secure their firearms to prevent access from minors or from others who are dangerous, convicted of crimes, and make our communities safer. The federal law would be modeled, in fact, on Connecticut's law, as it will be revised under some of the proposals to be made by Representative Scanlon. It's a pretty straightforward and simple measure. It would hold accountable anybody who fails to safely store a firearm knowing that a child may have access to it or a prohibited individual, and impose a penalty of $500 or forfeiture. It would be the sense of Congress that any failure to store a firearm safely, if it causes injury or death, would be provable by negligence or causation, and it would punish that individual who fails to store a firearm safely, if it's responsible for death, with a Class D felony, imprisonment up to 5 years. This measure would apply whether or not the firearm is loaded, whether or not the owner is in the home or other place where the gun should be safely stored. Safe storage is not a technological feat. It is achievable by simple devices, lock boxes, other kinds of measures that are widely used, and every individual owning a firearm should be responsible for using. And so we're going to press for this measure at a federal level, which, by the way, also would provide incentives for states to do what Connecticut's doing, incentives in grants and other kinds of benefits. So the states still have an obligation to act, and they should act as Connecticut is doing. But my hope is that my colleagues will see this simple, straightforward step as a matter of moral obligation. We know that the country wants background checks and other common sense, sensible measures, which we will be advancing and advocating during this Congress. Safe storage should be a simple, achievable step on which there is clear consensus. And if anybody needs to be persuaded, if anybody needs to understand the reasons for this measure, if anyone has any doubt that gun owners should be held accountable if they fail to safely store their firearms, they need only to talk to Kristen and Michael's song, because their voice and their face is the kind of evidence that nobody can refute. What happened to them is a parent's worst nightmare. I say that as a parent, a public official, and a citizen of Connecticut. It is a parent's worst nightmare, and I can only thank them from my heart for being here today, for their constant advocacy, and for their courage and strength. And I want to introduce Kristen Song, then Jeremy Stein, and Sean Scanlon. Kristen, thank you for being here.
Good morning. When I was pregnant with my children, I prayed that when my children were of the age that they could be drafted, that this country would be at peacetime. I was so afraid if they got drafted or enlisted that they would be injured or killed in a country far away. I was a mother torn between my love for my children and my love for my country. What I didn't realize was that the United States was waging war against itself. I didn't realize that my children had a higher chance of being killed with a gun in our beloved country than they did being deployed to war. I didn't realize that more Americans have died from gun violence in our country in the last 50 years than in all the wars in American history. This war is killing our children, our mothers, fathers, siblings, police, our citizens. We are killing each other. We are the casualties of this war. Sadly, on January 31st, 2018, another name was added to that casualty list. My worst fear. My beautiful boy Ethan walked out of our home and walked towards his death. He walked to his friend's house where, unbeknownst to me, his friend's father, Dan Markle, kept 3 unsecured firearms in the home. Dan Markle's idea of safe storage was to store the firearms and ammunition in a cardboard box in a Tupperware container and place the keys to the trigger locks in the same container, essentially making the trigger locks useless and the guns unsecured. The father, who was a private investigator, claimed he did not notice that the boys had been playing with the guns for 6 months. It was only a matter of time before someone would be shot. Heartbreakingly, it was my child, Ethan, who was shot in the head and had 0 chance of survival. He had just turned 15. When Ethan was killed, I began researching the common denominator of gun violence. It became so obvious. Access to guns. 80% of our children are taking their own lives with unsecured firearms. 80% of school shootings are with unsecured firearms. 70% of our veterans kill themselves with an unsecured firearm. An unsecured gun is stolen every 2 minutes in America, and many stolen guns go on to be used in violent crimes and, of course, accidental shootings with unsecured firearms, like Ethan's, are killing our precious children. This legislation that will be submitted is simply geared to save lives. You see, a bullet is an equal opportunist. It does not see political party, race, religion, rich, poor, age, occupation, gender. It just sees death. When Senator Blumenthal and Representative Scanlon were approached about introducing legislation to require gun owners to secure their firearms, they did not fail to answer the call, and nor should we. In the past, when this country has been at war, we have banded together, one American extending a hand to another without hesitation. In times of crisis, brave Americans run towards danger, not away. They do this because in the end, we are all citizens of one country. We are the soldiers in this war. We need to take that same commitment, determination, and forge that unity to defeat gun violence. This legislation is a win-win. The gun violence in this country could be reduced dramatically if guns are safely stored and secured. This legislation is nonpartisan because all of us have the same goal, to keep our loved ones safe. I respect and understand those who own guns and want to protect their loved ones. Here is the good news. Technology has made it possible to keep your firearms out of inappropriate hands while also permitting quick access to your firearm in the event that you need to protect your loved one or your home. The safes can be opened in a matter of seconds. Tomorrow would have been my beautiful boy's 16th birthday. Since Ethan's death, the 4 words that I've heard over and over, I can't even imagine. For a moment, imagine that your loved one was shot, and as they are choking on their blood, being rushed to the hospital, the EMTs are working heroically, but they know it's in vain. You pray that your loved one did not die in pain, afraid, or alone. You race to the hospital and the ER doctor whispers to you that your beautiful loved one is gone, and your world shatters into a million tiny pieces. You ask if you could say goodbye, kiss them, tell them that they are loved and cherished, but you are told you cannot, for your loved one is unrecognizable. You leave the hospital with your family, but you leave one behind. As you slowly walk to your car, your loved one is being wheeled to the morgue, and that is just the beginning of your heartbreak, your nightmare. I see in your faces the fear that this war may never end, that we will abandon each other, that more blood will be shed, but it will not be this day. This day we will stand together, white, black, brown, rich, poor, Jewish, Christian, Democrat, and Republican. We will join hands and reduce gun violence by taking one simple action: storing our firearms safely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank Senator Blumenthal and Senator Murphy for doing this, something that we need in this country, and Representative Sean Scanlon for being champions on gun violence prevention, and especially want to thank the Songs, Kristen and Mike, and their daughter for being here today, because that's really where the courage stems from the survivors of gun violence. Last night I was doing a little research because I wanted to really understand the impact of this law and understand and speak to people so that they understand the impact of this law. Last night in Oklahoma, 4 kids were at a party. They got a hold of an unsecured gun. They started playing the gun, and one of them was shot and is now in the hospital fighting for his life. I mean, that was just last night. On New Year's Eve, a 9-year-old was shot in the back by her 5-year-old cousin in California. 2 days earlier, a 7-year-old boy was shot by another child inside his home in Florida. On December 12th, a toddler shot himself and 7-year-old brother after finding a gun left in the backpack in their home in Missouri. In November, a 4-year-old found an unsecured gun in a house and shot himself. That was in Hartford, in Connecticut. A 13-year-old girl was shot and killed in Wisconsin, a 14-year-old in Georgia, a 5-year-old, and a 17-year-old in Michigan, and the list goes on and on. And all of these shootings occurred in the safety of their own homes. This is happening, this is real, This is affecting our country, and it is devastating to our communities. And although these deaths and shootings were preventable by locking guns and keeping them out of reach of children, not one of these incidents resulted in any one person being held accountable for not locking up their guns. And this needs to change now. Research by the American Academy of Pediatrics, they are on board with this because they know that gun laws, that the states have the strictest gun laws. If you have strict gun laws and storage laws, you can half the number of children that die as a result of gun violence. And that is why they are recommending very strongly storage laws like the one that is being introduced today. So it's not just about homes, it's also about preventing suicides, it is also about preventing school shootings, and it is also about preventing urban gun violence. But whether we're talking about these school shootings or urban violence or accidental shootings or suicides, the one common thread is ease of access to firearms. And Connecticut Against Gun Violence, we will continue to fight for common sense gun laws like this because it is just way too easy to get a gun in America. And many of the guns that are being used for crimes in our cities are brought in from other states, that is true, but they're also stolen from homes and from vehicles for people who do not lock up their guns. And we want to make sure that this law also applies to that as well, so that we are preventing guns from ending up in our city, which is a big chunk of the violence that we're experiencing in Connecticut and in other states. I spent yesterday, a good part of yesterday, in Bridgeport with a family whose 12-year-old was shot and killed right in front of their house in Bridgeport, Clinton Howell, and that gun had been previously stolen. And this is not a big task that we're asking for. It's not a big ask. Every responsible gun owner knows that guns should be locked up when they're not in use. In fact, I brought the manual that I got when I went through a gun safety course that's sponsored by the NRA. And you can see on the cover, it says Safe Storage Fundamentals. And on page 19, the beginning of chapter 2, it is an entire chapter on safe storage, an entire chapter dedicated to what we're talking about right now that we're putting into law. So everyone agrees that this is the right thing to do in order to ensure the safety of our children. And what we're proposing here, because this is a nonpartisan bill, we want to make sure that everyone comes together and holds people responsible for not being responsible gun owners. In New Hampshire, a 19-year-old recently was shot and killed with a .22 rifle. A .22 rifle, and I've heard over and over again, well, you know, why can't we exclude .22 guns from our gun laws because nothing bad can happen with a .22 rifle. Well, that's not true, because even something like that can kill a child. So, so all we're asking for is common sense here. When they're not in use, they need to be locked up. We can reduce the number of stolen guns that end up our streets in half if we do this. We can reduce the number of suicides. We can reduce the number of school shootings. We can reduce the number of accidental shootings. And we are asking everyone to support legislation like we're trying to pass in Connecticut. We're asking everyone to support the bill that's being introduced by our senators. And we encourage every state in the country to pass similar laws. We need to do this because our lives depend on it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
My name is Sean Scanlon. I have the honor of representing this community in the Connecticut General Assembly, and it's an even bigger honor for me to stand with the songs each and every day to try to pass Ethan's Law. This is something that we can do, all of us, in the name of not just Ethan, but everyone whose lives have been lost in the state of Connecticut by the hand of gun violence. And this terrible epidemic is one of these problems that, you know, oftentimes public officials, we are challenged by great public problems that we don't have answers to. We have the answer to this epidemic. We have the cure. We just have to find it in ourselves to have the courage to do the right thing. And I really believe that we will find that courage. And at a time when our country is very divided and our state is very divided, This is an issue that we're already seeing Democrats and Republicans, gun owners and gun rights activists coming together and saying, I stand on behalf of safe storage, because they understand, and all of us understand, that this is the right thing to do to not just protect lives, but to make our entire community safer. And so I am so proud to be sponsoring this legislation at the state level. I'm so proud to be working on a parallel track with our United States Senator, Richard Blumenthal, Senator Murphy. I know Rosa DeLaura's office is represented here today. All of us can do this together. And so if you're out there wondering what you can do to help, write a letter to the editor, sign up, ask your legislator to co-sponsor my bill in the state level, and get behind Senator Blumenthal and Senator Murphy at the federal level. We can get this done this year. We can keep communities safe, and I'm so proud to be a part of this, and I'm so proud to be joined by so many people here today in the name of Ethan and all we've lost, to say, never again, no more, let's end this now. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Matt Hoy, and I'm proud to be a representative of the town of Guilford as its first selectman. Senator Blumenthal, thank you for all you've done for our state and for this community, and your leadership on this issue. You and Senator Murphy continue to do the good work that you've been known to do, so thank you. Sean, we're also very proud of you, a homegrown boy, a Guilford man who is now a leader in Hartford, and there's no greater evidence of that than you taking the leadership position on this bill. Thank you. To Mike and Kristen, your strength and your willingness to turn this tragedy into something positive is inspiring. It truly is inspiring. I had a conversation yesterday with someone about this bill, and they said, do you think it'll make a difference? And I said, I know it will make a difference, even if it is a difference in one family and one community that does not have to go through this tragedy again. It will make a difference, and we're so proud of the work that you're doing. And with that, I want to add my voice of support to this issue, and I am confident that this community, the town of Guilford, is behind this initiative 100%. Thank you.
I just want to thank First Selectman Hui and the town of Guilford for having us here. You know, I look out at this green. This scene is a quintessentially American scene. And this cause is a quintessentially American cause. It is about the safety and security of our children, our citizens, our communities. And I challenge the NRA. Join us.
Yes.
Don't oppose us.
Yes.
Join us. There was a time when the NRA stood strong for storage, safety, fundamentals. It should join us now. We can seek common ground here. But if you oppose us, I can promise you this measure will become law over your opposition, because the gun lobby's vice-like grip on Congress is breaking. And I can tell you that our delegation, Congresswoman DeLauro, Senator Murphy, myself, are going to keep fighting until we get this law done. We owe it to Mike and Kristen to pass Ethan's law. Thank you all for being here today. If there are any questions.
On a technical point, Senator Sean, is there anything in the two laws that is different as far as the state law versus the federal law? Anything in the language that distinguishes itself?
There are some technical differences. For example, the federal law provides for grants to encourage states to adopt these measures. The federal law provides for forfeiture of a weapon that is unsafely stored and a fine in the event that it is not secured. I think apart from those kinds of differences, and there are some wording differences, The differences are really technical, and they are substantially the same, and that's why we have written them to be the same or similar, because we want these laws to be a model for other states.
Thank you. Question on enforcement, sir. Having laws on the books is a good start, and there are pre-existing laws which were woefully inadequate in the sense that they weren't enforced, and the laws themselves need some updating. In terms of the reality of enforcement, unfortunately, in many cases, the perpetrator of the law would be somebody who, in fact, is suffering the tragedy of a loss of somebody on their premises. But how do you go about effectively enforcing a law that really works best with voluntary compliance?
That is a great question. As you know, most of my life was spent in law enforcement as a prosecutor and as Attorney General of the state. So law enforcement, I know as well as anyone, is key to making the law real. We want this law to be real. And this measure would give local, state, and federal law enforcement a clear mandate, a clear incentive to enforce laws on gun safety. And it would depend on vigorous law enforcement, and I would hope that that incentive would help make the law real. But let me also say, as a parent of 4 children, we always asked when our children were going to play in somebody else's house or visit somebody else's house, is there a gun? Do you have a gun? And I think this measure would be very important in enabling parents and caregivers to say to another parent and caregiver, you know, it's the law. Safe storage is the law. And in a nice way, you have an obligation to obey the law. So I think we all have a responsibility, and it will work just as to take drunk driving. Most of the progress against drunk driving is from people intervening. On domestic violence, the same. So we really depend on voluntary support, looking after each other, and making sure that the norms and the standards that we observe ourselves are in our laws, but are also enforced through voluntary compliance.
Under the federal proposal, what would a gun owner actually have to do to safely store his weapon?
Well, I'm sorry, what would
a gun owner have to do to actually safely store his weapon?
Well, the law provides for safe storage or the use of a security device or a safety device. So it is fairly open-ended as long as it's effective. And the reason it's open-ended is because new technology is available, as Kristen mentioned, that is very unintrusive. It enables people to use weapons for self-defense, and safe storage is required as long as somebody is not carrying the weapon or keeping it in close proximity. So if at night someone wants to put it on the bedstand and then store it in the morning, that's permissible. They don't have to keep it locked overnight if they want to keep it in close proximity. So there are various devices, storage boxes that can be locked, other kinds of safety devices that can be used, and the law is open-ended. It doesn't lay out a list. Well, I want to thank everyone again for being here. Your presence, your involvement is really the key here, because it's the activists who are going to make a difference here, and I cannot thank you enough. CAGV, Everytown, Sandy Hook Promise, Newtown Action Alliance. We are so fortunate in Connecticut to have such a vital group of activists and advocates. Thank you, Jeremy, and most important, I really want to thank Kristen and Mike for giving us the impetus and inspiration for Ethan's Law. We're going to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.